Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and we are back with Zachary Priehs, who had an engaging, I think, 1.5 hours of conversation with us previewing Penn State and Michigan. Since he was so good at previewing what was a top 10 matchup and a big game for the Wolverines, I thought that we would bring him back on to preview an even bigger game, the game between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Michigan Wolverines. Zachary Priehs, as we discussed in last, or 2 weeks ago's episode, weird way of saying that, is getting his master's in broadcast and digital journalism with a focus on sports. And he's covered multiple Syracuse sports, specifically soccer. He's also covered some of their basketball games. And I think he's delved a little bit into football as well. But he's a big-time college football fan. He's put the skills that he's learned into great use there, and he has a lot of good analysis to provide in today's episode. How are you doing, Zach?
I'm doing well. You know, I was doing better before I watched the Lions get torn apart by Jordan Love. That was a little bit rough, but I'm doing great. I'm full. Had a good Thanksgiving, and I'm gonna enjoy talking some football, and then I'll probably go watch the second half of the Egg Bowl afterwards.
Yeah, hopefully that game's entertaining. Ole Miss struggled to beat Louisiana Monroe, totally took an off week last week. I'm doing well. I'm very hungry, but I will get to eat after this episode, and I want to talk college football. Welcome back, Nathaniel Lathy. I'm doing well. How are you doing? A person says, let's go. Well, I guess a person is excited for us. At least one person. Happy
Nice.
Thanksgiving, by the way, for everyone. Something that I guess I'm thankful for is that my team is really, really good. But they're going to face another team that is at a similar level to them this weekend. And there's just a lot to think about in regards to the game. What are your thoughts on the ramifications, the impact, how the loser will be viewed, and how the winner of the game will be viewed?
Yeah, well, really quick, I'm thankful to have hospitals near my house for when I drop dead from a heart attack on Saturday watching this game. Uh, I should be in good hands. I see it being a close one, and like you said, there's a lot of ramifications. 11-0, 11-0. I believe this is the fifth time. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the fifth time that these teams have met at 11-0 or undefeated. I could be wrong. I believe I saw this is the fifth time that's happened. I believe it might be the 15th top 5 matchup between these squads. So obviously a ridiculous amount of history. We don't have to go into that. All-time series, Michigan leads 60-51 and 6 being the ties. Winner of this is going to go to the Big Ten championship. And honestly, I think regardless of winning or losing the Big Ten championship, will go to the playoff. Of course, either of these teams would be favored against Iowa, but I think the winner of this pretty much gets an automatic bid. The loser would need a lot of help to get in.
Yeah. Early projected odds, I think, from FanDuel are Michigan and Ohio State would be 21-point favorites over Iowa in Indianapolis. So pretty big, very big spread. I agree with you. I think the loser of the game is likely done, especially if it's Michigan, given the sign stealing and how that could probably really already has tainted how they've been viewed this season and in previous seasons. And they have the weaker strength of schedule compared to Ohio State. If both teams are going to get in the playoff, I think Michigan has to win. Some dominoes have to fall in other conferences, and then maybe Ohio State can back their way in. They're similar to Ole Miss. I said weeks ago that if Ole Miss somehow beat Georgia and win out, an 11-1 Ole Miss would have a very strong argument of entering the college football playoff. But of course, that didn't happen. Ole Miss got skull-dragged through the dirt. They lost, I think, 52-17 or something insane like that in Sanford Stadium. And now, here we are. I think that both teams' reputation, to a certain degree, rests on this game, this one game. I think the ramifications from a loss could not be bigger than what we have right here. Ryan Day will face incredible competitive pressure. Michigan and Jim Harbaugh will be doubted in a lot of ways. Their success of the past 2 seasons could be viewed as flukish. That's really where I'm at. I'm nervous, I'll say, as a Michigan fan. I think there's many ways Ohio State can win. I think there are many ways that Michigan can win. Do you agree with what I said in regards to the competitive pressure and the doubt? I feel like the loser of this game is going to get a real punch in the mouth and have some of their teeth pulled out.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree with you. And I think, like you said, it's going to look different for each team. So if Michigan loses this game, you're going to have the crowd that says, there you go. You didn't have Connor Stallions. You couldn't beat Ohio State. The last 2 years are fraudulent. Revoked the wins, which I don't think that's actually going to happen, by the way, just on the side. But you're going to have that crowd that dismisses everything Michigan's accomplished and these young men have accomplished for the last couple of years, which in my eyes is a shame, and I think that's going too far. On the other side, if Ohio State loses, I think you've got a real discussion about Ryan Day as head coach. If Ryan Day loses not even to Jim Harbaugh, but to Sharon Moore, a guy who has head coached now 2 games for Michigan. Of course, he coached one earlier in the season. I forget which one it was, but it was one of those
Bowling Green.
Okay, Bowling Green. And so he had coached that game. That's kind of a nothing game against Bowling Green. And then he coached, the last two. So he's done 3. So he's done 3 games this year. Yeah, sorry. So he's done Penn State, Maryland, and Bowling Green. And if you go out and lose to him, if you're Ryan Day, given you're underdogs right now still, betting line-wise. But if you lose that game, that's a bad look. And I think the Ohio State fan base is going to be as up in arms as we've ever seen them.
Yes.
And they're going to start having some questions about why is this guy Ryan Day 1-3 against Michigan, and the only game he won was with Urban Meyer's recruits.
Yeah. I think that is fair. I think the whole, he'll be losing to someone who isn't a head coach, I think that's unfair in the sense that Harbaugh's there 6 out of 7 days. And he could be a Larry Coker, where he's like a genius coordinator and just a trash head coach. But I don't think he's a Larry Coker or a Randy Shannon or that. I don't think so. So I don't think, it will be used. Michigan fans will use it for legitimate purposes or even for trolling just to poke fun.
Yeah.
I will probably joke about it sometimes in my head if it happens. Ohio State fans will use it against him because they'll be very angry at the fact that, that he lost to a team without their main head coach on the sidelines. That stinks. But, yeah, I think that he'll face no doubt competitive pressure. I think a proper assessment of, is he the next John Cooper, for example, if he loses this game, if he wins this game, that discussion's thrown out the door. Yeah. If he loses this season and then loses next season after Michigan loses everyone and he has them at home, I think then I could understand hot seat talk. But right now, he's 11-0. He hasn't lost to any Big Ten team, nor will he until potentially next season outside of Michigan. And he's 56-6, and he has a winning record against top 25 and top 10 teams. Not even Jim Harbaugh has that. Before we get any further into this, I do want to check the chat. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, says Zach Scout. Akini Obi. Michigan fans trying to say that the committee views them differently. Not true. He also says success over the past 2 seasons getting destroyed in the semifinals. This is obviously, I don't think, the correct perception because most teams would kill for this kind of success. And Michigan didn't get destroyed by TCU. They choked that game away and they overlooked TCU. That was a game that, if you watched the entire game, it's known that Michigan would probably win more than 5 times out of 10 in that matchup, but they didn't, which is credit to Sonny Dykes and credit to that staff. Michigan, in terms of playoff appearances and total wins and conference championships, has been the second most successful program over the past 2 seasons. Now,
Oh, for
Alabama winning the playoff and almost capturing a national championship, I think if you include playoff wins, you'd still have to put them ahead of Michigan. But that's a top 3 program right there in Ann Arbor. So I think that's ridiculous to say that's success for a poverty program. Both programs losing the semifinals last year in the playoffs. Not good for the Big Ten, soon to be 18. No, I think that if Michigan or Ohio State, whichever one of them wins the Big Ten, I think one of them's winning a semifinal. Almost guaranteed in my mind, unless they match up with Georgia or Alabama. Then that's more difficult.
Maybe maybe Oregon. That could be a fun game.
Oh, that'd be difficult. I don't know. Alabama scares me more as a Michigan fan than Oregon does due to Nick Saban and the fact that Milroe is just really good at the deep ball, and I think Michigan's pass defense is worse than their run defense. But Oregon, I think they're a much better team than Alabama, and some might push back on that. But I think Alabama right now, what they are doing and what they have been ever since they've looked more impressive, is they are beating up on the weak. They are beating up on teams that they should beat outside of LSU, and that took an injury to Jaden Daniels to really put that game out of the question. But we can get into that later in regards to Auburn, Alabama. We'll be talking about Week 13 overall at the end of this video. But we want to dive deep into Michigan and Ohio State. What do you think are some key matchups for both of these teams?
Yeah, I mean, we got a couple of key matchups here. When we're talking about Michigan's offense against Ohio State's defense, I think we're going to have to look for a corner. I mean, obviously you've got the workhorse Blake Corum, and he's going to get a lot of carries, and Donovan Edwards is going to see his fair share of carries. Ohio State fans are still hearing the Don screamed by Gus Johnson in their head. They'd like to not have that happen again this week. But so we know about those guys. I want to talk about Cornelius Johnson a little bit and some of these tight ends. So Roman Wilson is Michigan's wide receiver 1, and that's no secret. He has been all season long. He's racked up a lot of touchdowns. He's one of the fastest guys in college football, just straight line speed. He's a really slippery wide receiver. Michigan likes to use him on third downs, kind of over the middle, these crossing routes where he can just straight up outrun people and just use that pure athleticism. So Ohio State knows that. They're not stupid, and Jim Knowles is going to game plan for that on defense. I don't know whether they'll try to go man-to-man on Roman Wilson or whether they'll bracket him, but regardless, Cornelius Johnson, Michigan's wide receiver 2, is going to have to step up. And Colston Loveland and A.J. Barner, these 2 really good tight ends for Michigan. Loveland will be coming back next year. Otherwise, he'd be going to the NFL right now. Those guys are going to kind of need to provide what I think is sort of a safety blanket for J.J. McCarthy at times. And earlier in the season, we saw J.J. McCarthy scramble a lot and be really good in some of these scramble drills, finding those tight ends. Later in the year, I don't think he's been as good in that area. And I'll be interested to see how he kind of keeps his composure in the pocket today. Or on Saturday, excuse me.
Yeah. He's done a very good job, I think McCarthy has, of producing outside of the tackle box and outside of the pocket as opposed to inside the pocket. And I agree with you on the front of Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson. I think that the passing matchup between Michigan's pass defense, Ohio State's pass offense, and then Michigan's pass offense and Ohio State's pass defense, I think that favors the Buckeyes because I think they have the better secondary. I think they have the better wide receiver core.
Oh, for sure.
They might have the best individual tight end out of the whole group.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. I think McCarthy is decisively better at quarterback, but McCord's still good, and he is used to carrying a bigger load on the offense than McCarthy is. I was smiling, and I couldn't stop because I was just remembering the Don, because he really hasn't done a whole lot this season. He did have a good game against Penn State and a better game against Maryland. So I think he's peaking as an individual player, which is great. But just something about the Don and then his results this season is just kind of funny to me. McCorum has 20 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, he hasn't been as good this year as he was last year. He's not quite as good of a cutter as Blake. He's got really great straight line speed. I'd like to see Michigan use him more creatively in the passing game. I said this before the Penn State game, and I'm not sure we really did. Now, to be fair, he broke out running the ball there. He had 2 huge runs. One of them might have won us the game on 3rd and 11, a huge touchdown carry, which kind of broke that game open a little bit. So he was big down the stretch. Hey, maybe he just saves his energy for big games. Maybe he's going to show up big on Saturday. He's just been saving the energy for those 2 games, with Penn State and Ohio State games.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. Ohio State, by the way, and this is where we can really get into like deep matchups and statistics. They like to go wide technique. They love to leave big gaps in between their defensive linemen and go wide up front. And they typically rely on Eichenberg and Chambers and their defensive backs to provide gap integrity. Meanwhile, Michigan typically doesn't stack the box as heavily, and they rely more on just their front 4 to maintain gap. They rely on their D-line basically to do everything. And then if they need to bring in the linebackers, then they do. Tell me what you think about both of these. Let's do defense, because I think both defenses are better than both offenses. So let's start with the defenses. Let's mix it up and talk about the best first. What do you think about these 2 defenses? What are some similarities, differences? What do you like about them? What do you dislike about them?
Yeah, well, a couple of similarities are that they're both really good, and they both stop the run. They're both really good based off stopping the run. Not that they don't have good secondaries. Denzel Burke is really good. Will Johnson is going to be a star. I think a star in the NFL once he eventually goes there. So Michigan's got talent. Ohio State's got talent in the secondary as well. But like you said, I mean, Ohio State, they lean on Tommy Eichenberg. And, hey, if you're going to lean on somebody, Tommy Eichenberg's not a bad option. He's really, really absolutely God-given talent at linebacker. Ohio State only gives up 3.3 yards per rush on the season. Michigan only gives up three straight up, 3.0. So those numbers are both really good. I have written down that I think if either of these teams can run for 3.5 or more, you can consider that a success.
Yep.
In my eyes, Michigan's offensive line hasn't been as physically dominant as it has been in the past. And Ohio State, on the other hand, is kind of trending upwards in the physicality ranks, I guess. They're trying to become more physical as a team, but I don't think they're quite there where they can just bully you and run the ball up the middle and say, too bad, we're going to line up 7 offensive linemen and run the ball straight at you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't think they're there yet. So I think if you can run the ball for 3.5 or more, that might be a success for either of these teams, because both of these defensive fronts are really good at stopping the run.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting to note that they're so I mean, they both run a 4-2-5. They run similar schemes. They have both better defensive tackle rooms than defensive end rooms. And I think Michigan's decisively better at corner than they are safety. I think Ohio State with Jermaine Matthews Jr., Jordan Hancock, and Denzel Burke is probably deeper at corner than they are at safety. I don't know about better, though, because Josh Proctor might be the single best defensive back, along with Will Johnson, Mike Sainristil, and Burke. It'd be those 4 who could contend for the best individual DB in this game. Ohio State, I think, is more of a bend but don't break defense. Michigan's they're not aggressive. They're conservative, much like Ohio State's. But I think their goal is to get off the field as quickly as possible, which means there's more calculated aggression. But it's interesting because both of these defenses are so similar, and yet you can find these minor differences at the same time. Like Ohio State sends more men forward. I think they blitz more than Michigan does, and yet Michigan gets better pressure with less. At the same time, though, Ohio State's doing more of the blitzing, and they're not allowing these same big pass plays through their secondary, which is a testament to how good their corners and safeties are. Both are top 2 in scoring defense. Ohio State only allows 9.3 points per game. Michigan allows 9. Ohio State's first in opponent yards per point and opponent points per play. Michigan's second in those. And in red zone scoring attempts and red zone scores per game, both teams are top 4. And in ESPN efficiency, these teams are top 4 defensively as well. Michigan's won by a mile over number 2 Penn State, and number 4 Ohio State in efficiency is pretty close to number 2 Penn State. So these defenses, they're legit.
Yeah.
They are. And I think that Michigan's defensive line has a matchup advantage against Ohio State's O-line. I think there's even a chance, a sizable one, a big one, that Ohio State's D-line could have an advantage against Michigan's O-line. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, that very well could be true. I think that might decide the game. If Michigan can run the ball effectively, I do think Ohio State's in trouble because that takes so much pressure off J.J. McCarthy and doesn't force J.J. McCarthy to go out and win the game single-handedly for Michigan, which he's talented enough to do, but he hasn't necessarily showed us that he can do that yet. So we haven't seen that on tape yet from him. However, if Ohio State stops the run, then all of a sudden it's okay, JJ. Let's see what you can do.
Exactly.
Can you drop back there on 3rd and 8 a couple times on a big drive, down 31-24 or tied whatever the score may be? Maybe you're up 28-24. It's a big 3rd down. They're coming at you. Can you keep your composure? Can you go through a couple reads and maybe find Colston Loveland? Or can you prevent yourself from having those happy feet in the pocket that he sometimes has? That's one of the problems that I think has come back for J.J. McCarthy in the last couple weeks is throughout the season, he's been so calm in the pocket. He's been really good at escaping the pocket, keeping his eyes downfield and being intelligent in the way he escapes, but he's also sat in the pocket really well. And sometimes he's had to swallow it up and take a sack, and that's okay. But he's done really well, and not turning his back and running the other direction. The last couple weeks, I have to be honest, some of those fundamentals have started to slip for him, I think.
Oh, I would agree with that 100%. Especially in the Maryland game. That was a bad game. But there's a comment that Akini Obi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think I am, but correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. He brings up a good point. He's been getting McCarthy, has been getting a lot of criticism for one game. And this is something that I'm seeing not just with him, but with Michigan overall. One bad game. The Penn State game was Michigan ran the most basic playbook and still controlled that game. Yeah. Meanwhile, Ohio State bringing out like weird plays on 4th and goal, fail. Multiple drives, more than Michigan Penn State because Penn State abandoned the run, therefore they no longer care about chewing clock like they did against Michigan. More possessions and more punts instead of more scores for the Buckeyes. Granted, they were without key players against Penn State. Michigan wasn't necessarily. But one bad game, just one. And the Bowling Green one was bad, but Michigan looked more dominant in that bad performance than they did against Maryland. And now, and we'll get back to the offense and on the field, but I really want to touch on this so we can communicate with the chat. Right now, 78% of all public bets are on Ohio State to cover a 3.5-point spread. And you know the total amount of bets in Ohio State's favor is rising probably every minute. That line is not moved. It's sitting at 3/3.5. It actually rose back up to 3.5 according to ESPN Bet. And then on Moneyline, it's even more lopsided. Per Moneyline on Action Network, let me find it. I think I passed it, sadly, on the screen. 84% of bets are on Ohio State Moneyline with plus odds. If we assume that the total amount of money is the same as the total amount of bets, which is rarely the case, but it is what it is. Put on $1 for every percent that each team has. The payout would be 12 times more in Ohio State's favor by money line than Michigan. That's nuts. That's crazy. Yeah. So I want to get an answer from the chat, and while Zachary's giving his answer, I hope I can get your answer. What do you think about that? Because the public perception is largely in the view of Ohio State is going to either lose in a close game or they're going to win, whether that's dominate or whether that's in a close game. I think the major consensus is Ohio State loses in a close game or they dominate, and then it flips back to Michigan, I think, dominating. I think very few people are picking Michigan to win in a close game because most people picking Michigan to win are Michigan fans or some higher up analysts who are pretty split on this game. What do you all think about that? And I see a lot of you talking about Nebraska being favored over Iowa. Husker Chuck, Nathaniel Lathy. We're going to get to that later in the show. And someone else said, GOJ said, Michigan 3.5 at home. That means it's essentially a pick'em if it were a neutral site. Yes. Either Michigan would probably be favored by 1 point or it would be a pick'em neutral site. What do you think about those numbers and the public perception? And do you think it's understandable, or do you think it's wrong or right?
I mean, yeah, I think the public perception is being based on a couple things. I think it's that Ohio State has started to kind of seemingly get it together as of these last couple weeks. Give me 1 second to pull up some of their scores from the last couple weeks so I don't just rattle off random stuff. They beat Michigan State badly, as you would expect, 38-3. They whooped Minnesota 37-3. That game could have been a lot worse if they wanted it to be. The same with the MSU game. They kind of ran away from Rutgers late. So really their last 10 quarters, if you want to count the second half of that Rutgers game is 2 quarters, and then the last 8 have been really good. And they've been playing some really solid football. And I think Kyle McCord has started to look better, which was the concern for a lot of Ohio State fans early in the year. And on the other side of things, Michigan, hasn't always been smooth sailing. They competed with Penn. They beat Penn State by 9. Penn State hung around in that game, and that's not a bad win by any means. That's a great win. It's the best win of their season and one of the better wins any team's had this season. Then against Maryland, only winning by 7 in College Park. That's a little sketchy. J.J. McCarthy looked a little rusty that game, maybe only completing 52% of his passes for 141 yards. He also threw a pick in that game. So the Maryland game was a little bit of a head scratcher. So I think the trend of where these teams are going is affecting people. I think people might be overstating the importance of that. If we want to look back to last year, Michigan played a horrible game against Illinois. We talked about this before we went live. Michigan played Illinois last year in week 12 and looked garbage. I mean, J.J. McCarthy was missing wide open receivers left and right. It looked like Michigan was going to lose that game. On top of all that, their best player got hurt, Blake Corum. He goes down with a knee injury. His season was over. So Michigan fans were up in arms. The country was, the game's over. Michigan's going to get blown out in Columbus the next week. And I think the line was Ohio State by 9 at the time. And then obviously we all know what happened. So yeah, I think public perception is based on I think the trend of these two teams is affecting betting. I think also a lot of the talk about sign stealing is affecting where these bets are going. And whether this is true or not, I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be shocked if the negative coverage ESPN is providing Michigan has affected people unconsciously to kind of I in my eyes, and listen, this is coming from a Michigan fan, so know that I'm biased here. I'll be upfront about that. I think ESPN has been pretty horrible in their coverage of Michigan and hasn't really given Michigan a fair chance in many instances. So I think that might skew public perception a little bit. But listen, Ohio State's a really good team, and I think 3.5 is a fair line. So
yeah. It's so interesting because Ohio State has been peaking, But then you look at 2021, and they were peaking then too.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, why? Well, they played Purdue and Michigan State. That was their 2 games before Michigan, I do believe. And they boat raced them because Purdue and Michigan State were just bad defensive matchups, especially because Michigan State's secondary, and for Purdue's defense was never great. Really the whole season wasn't a great defense. It was an okay defense, but Ohio State blows out okay defenses. And you looked in 2021, and Nebraska played them close. Penn State played them close. Now, Michigan played those close as well, but you can't just look at the past 2 games. And even if you just do that for Michigan's performance against Penn State, they could have won by more. I mean, they didn't. It's not like they didn't use McCarthy because they didn't think he could do anything. They didn't use him because there was a higher risk that he would have gotten killed in pass pro. And eventually they figured, well, maybe they didn't figure out, but after testing a few times, they figured out, hey, we can run on these guys, and they can't score on us. So why not, win this way? And even if Penn State was to get a flukish touchdown in the second half, the game's still tied. So you got to be careful. I'm a fan of recency bias because I think ranking Jimbo Fisher as a top 10 head coach for a while was asinine, and people still did it up until this season, or even during the season until he was fired, because, he won a national title like 10 years ago. But to just use one data point against Maryland and then one for Ohio State against Minnesota, I think is a little short-sighted. Also, that game against Minnesota isn't as impressive as the score indicates. They were only up 13-0 at the half. Michigan, I thought, played a better first half than Ohio State did. The difference is Ohio State closed out that game. They didn't get lazy. They finished strong. Michigan either checked out or something happened where someone threw a wrench in the tire and they nearly crashed the car. Let me see what the chat thinks. And we'll talk about offense. Yeah.
Just really quickly about, I think a lot of it was not having Roman Wilson. I think taking away Roman Wilson really was tough. And Michigan sat in for precautionary reasons, which nearly came back to bite them in the butt. They almost could have lost that ball game. But I think not having Roman Wilson really hurt J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah. It's true. Someone said when Michigan beats people, it's called dominating. When Ohio State beats people, it's just Minnesota. Well, I mean, honestly, outside of the Penn State game for Ohio State and Michigan, it is just those teams. Also, we have to take in consideration looking at advanced analytics from ESPN or other sites. Michigan has been consistently the more dominating team given common opponents almost every single time. And you look, I gathered over 120 rankings from teamrankings.com for different position groups and statistics, like rushing yards per game, for example, or points per play. Michigan leads in 83 of those analytics. They're ahead of Ohio State, either by a significant margin, an insurmountable margin in some cases, or a small margin. And same for Ohio State for about the other fourth of statistics that they lead in. But home field advantage, they're better analytically. Outside of, I think, 2, maybe 3 weeks, Michigan has looked like the better team. But there is a caveat to all of this, and then we'll get into offense, I promise. Jim Harbaugh's not on the sidelines. And we all know that Ryan Day is a better head coach than Sharon Moore. How much of an impact do you think that has?
I mean, I think what's really important to look at here is that Harbaugh's with the team for the rest of the week. So Harbaugh being with the team really 6.75 days out of the week, because he's traveling with the team to these away games. And then he's just at the hotel, he's saying goodbye, dapping people up and saying good luck. And then he sees them back at the hotel. That's literally what's happening. And it'll be the same this week. I'm sure he'll meet with the team. on game day. I would be surprised if he didn't. I'm sure he'll see them at least maybe tomorrow night, and kind of just get a feel of how the team's feeling, what's the vibe around the team. So he's with them most of the time. So this game plan is still Jim Harbaugh's game plan. The problem for Michigan and the advantage Ohio State has here is that your leader isn't on the sideline. So for if you're Michigan, you're missing a face. And how does that affect morale? When, let's say things go badly. Let's say first drive, JJ comes out, second pass of the game, picked. Return to the 20, Ohio State, 2 plays later, touchdown, up 7-0. Nightmare start for Michigan. What if that happens? How is the response with Sherrone Moore as the leader as compared to Jim Harbaugh? And I don't really have any questions about Sherrone Moore as a leader. I don't have any reason to question him, but Jim Harbaugh is the guy who's been here for these guys' careers. He's the one who's been there when JJ has had rough games. So I don't know. That's the type of stuff that you start to wonder, how will this team respond?
Yeah. And you kind of saw that in the Maryland game, too. They didn't necessarily pull away even when they got a touchdown or a safety. They had to rely on their defense and special teams to come through. That's an area of concern for sure. A chat says the difference between the last few years and this year, Ohio State has a better defense and Michigan has a much weaker offensive line. Yes, Ohio State has closed the physicality gap, and they've also closed the schematic gap. That's a good point. That's a good point by you, account name Ryan Daysbeard. I always found that name to be relatively funny. Nathaniel Lathy, Jim Knowles is a good scheme this year. I like it. The only thing I don't like about it, and it's not actually the scheme, it's just about his defense, and it's more with the players. Against Penn State, I watched some of those zero blitzes, and they did not get the amount of pressure they should have for zero blitzes. I mean, Aller was able to stand there for a few seconds, and he could have gotten a throw off, but the problem is Aller isn't poised, and he's not accurate even when he is poised. But that has more to do with the players than it has to do with the coaching. I think Jim Knowles has done a phenomenal coaching job this season, and he, along with Sherrone Moore, I think, and I'd say Jesse Minner, those three should be Broyles Award semifinalists. No doubt about it. Or not semifinalists, but finalists, because there's more than 4 finalists, I think. Before we continue, please make sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the notification bell. That way you can support the channel, and also we can see more of Zachary on here, because with him we get pretty good engagement for lives, and he provides a lot of analysis. Someone else said Ohio State versus Georgia for championship. Possible chance of revenge for Ohio State. Offensively, what do you think? Just in summary.
Yeah, offensively, I'll start with Michigan. Like I said, can Donovan Edwards step up and be the wingman to Blake Corum? I think this offensive line and Tucker Barnhart in particular need to play a good game. Barnhart has struggled for the Wolverines the last couple of games. I'm not entirely sure what his stats are over those games, but he's struggled. Tucker Barnhart, he's the right tackle for the Wolverines, and he's given up a lot of pressure. JJ McCarthy, a lot of those times when he's feeling that pressure and starting to get those happy feet that we talked about, it's because Barnhart's been getting beat. So he's going to have to really step up and play a good game. And Ohio State's got some good edges. Tui Moloau?
Yeah, Tui Moloau. That's
Tui
perfect.
Moloau? Okay, close enough. Okay. I didn't butcher it any more than your average person, so I'm proud of myself. But yeah, so he's obviously a really talented player. Of course, his coming out party was that Penn State game last year, so we know he has the big game ability to just single-handedly win you a game and end the game right there. So that's going to be huge coming off the edges, protecting J.J. McCarthy's blind sides offensively for the Wolverines. Like I said, I think Colston Loveland and Barner. Yeah, Barner. Goodness,
yeah,
blanked
AJ
on his
Barner.
name. And AJ Barner, yes, need to get involved for Michigan. I promise I watch Michigan games. They need to get involved, and they're going to have to block as well. For Ohio State, obviously we know you've got your safety valve, and that's Marvin Harrison, and use him. on big third downs, go to Marvin Harrison. I think sometimes coaches try to overthink it, and you think, well, they're going to double our best guy. Maybe we go to our 2 or 3. Listen, sometimes your best guy is just your best guy, and he's the most talented player on the field, and that's going to be the case. Marvin Harrison is the best player that's going to play on Saturday, maybe anywhere in the country. That's up for debate. Caleb Williams is really good. Brock Bowers is super talented. There's some other guys out there. Michael Penix is really good. Burton is really good on LSU. They've got a good wide receiver core. But he's one of them. He's up there, and he's certainly going to be the most talented player playing in the big house on Saturday. I think Michigan and Ohio State fans would agree on that. So, go to him when you need a big third down. Go to him. Try to find a way to get him the ball, whether it's a crossing route, trying to get him matched up with a linebacker, because at that point it's over, frankly. Whether you're throwing to him man-to-man with Will Johnson, which is an interesting matchup, that can go either way. But I'd still favor Marvin Harrison one-on-one against anybody in the country, including Will Johnson. So, yeah, go to him. And then also Cade Stover. We talked about this off air a little bit. If Cade Stover can step up and have a big game, maybe a 75, 80-yard and a touchdown game or even more, I think Michigan is in deep trouble, because then you got to start to worry about him as well as MHJ, and that's just a two-headed monster that I don't think you want to be facing. Of course, we haven't even talked about Emeka Ibuka, who's also a first-round talent. But I think Cade Stover is going to play a huge role. And the offensive line, these are obvious points. The offensive line is going to have to protect. If Michigan gets pressure on Kyle McCord, he's not a guy like J.J. McCarthy who can run around and create on third down. He's a little bit more of a stationary pocket passer. And I think if Michigan gets a lot of pressure on him, there's going to be a lot of issues for the Ohio State.
Yeah.
What do you think? I'm curious your thoughts on both of the offenses.
McCord is like a better version of Cade McNamara. And
yes.
Depending on the outcome of the game, there could be an argument that he is Cade McNamara, just with an infinitely better receiving core and a better play caller. Because Gaddis and Harbaugh collaborating on play calls in 2021 was sometimes the most frustrating thing I've ever watched. McCord's good. He's great. I think the key for Ohio State is, and part of it is circumstantial. Like, you can scheme it, but you have to see if it works. Because we know their passing offense is going to work to a certain degree with Marvin Harrison Jr. And if it doesn't, then Michigan's going to dominate that game. But I think that Ohio State will be able to pass the football. Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, guaranteed a touchdown at minimum. You have to use tight ends. You have to use Igbukah, like you said. I think that Henderson is the player to watch here. And that's because Henderson has looked really good. He's looked better than Blake Corum has overall this season. The only reason I am hesitant to say he's better than Blake Corum is Henderson hasn't faced Penn State. Penn State's by far the best defense Ohio State or Michigan has played. You can say that he had a good game against Notre Dame, and he did. He did. But Notre Dame is very up and down. And Notre Dame is better at secondary than they are front. And I think there's evidence for that, seeing how Clemson ran for, I think, over 200 yards on them. Like, they ran them into the dirt. I think TreVeyon Henderson's the player to watch overall. He's averaging nearly 100 yards per game, 6.7 yards per carry. He has 10 rushing touchdowns. Ohio State's rushing offense is worse than Michigan's, yes, but you got to account for the fact that Henderson has been out for 3 of Ohio State's games, and if he was in those games, there's a chance that Ohio State has some statistical advantages over the Wolverines in terms of rushing offense, despite having a worse offensive line. And Pro Football Focus would agree with that. Michigan is the better graded center. Guards, surprisingly, Ohio State's graded better at tackle. But I think overall, when healthy, Michigan is better at tackle. And they might be healthy completely at tackle this weekend. So for Ohio State, the key is have a balanced attack. You have to have that balanced attack, at least in terms of complementary football and yardage output. You can't not run the ball. If Ohio State can't run the football, they're not winning this game.
Yeah.
The winner of the game has to run the football. Now, streaks are bound to be ended at some point. So at some point, the team that rushes for less yards will win the game. I'm pretty sure that nearly happened in 2018, but in the end, Ohio State was eventually running down Michigan's tired defense. But for Michigan, really, I think because of their superior O-line and also because of, I think they have the better defensive line. For example, Michigan has a top 15 sack percentage. Ohio State's is outside the top 75 in sack percentage defensively. That's because teams pass more on Ohio State, and yet Ohio State has less sacks than Michigan. So when you factor that in, every single pass attempt against these two defenses, Michigan has nearly double the chance of getting a sack. Like nearly 50% more production in terms of pass rush. It's weird because Michigan has the better rush defense, and yet teams run more on Michigan than Ohio State. And I think that's because teams they don't want Michigan to dominate TOP, because they will if you don't find a way to chew clock. Meanwhile, for Ohio State, I think teams respect their rush defense more because they stack more in the box, and I don't think Ohio State chews clock as much, so I think they're less conscious about the clock management, or they just don't care as much against Ohio State. But that's a weird theory. I actually favor Michigan's offense in terms of overall consistency. I think Ohio State's probably has the higher upside if they play at their max ceiling. I just don't think they've played there all season, and I don't think they're going to in this game. And if they do, their ceiling might be lower than what I think in my mind, because I've been used to these amazing NFL offenses, and Ohio State doesn't have that. They don't have an NFL O-line like they have the past year or maybe 2 years. And they don't have an NFL quarterback. They don't. So that's my angle of it. Mainly talking about Ohio State, because for Michigan, I think that Corum and Edwards will be able to run, especially in short yardage situations. Michigan is the better fourth down conversion percentage offensively. Michigan is the higher passer rating, completion percentage. They have the deeper tight end room. My question for Michigan's offense is, can you even pass on this Ohio State defense? I don't know if they can, because that secondary is so good. And from there, then you're back to your game plan against Penn State, and I don't want to have to put my faith in only running the football in Ohio State, because I think that it's not necessarily they have a better defense than Penn State. It's that they have a much better offense, so you're not going to be able to control the game in the same way.
Yep. Yeah, I think a lot of it, like you said, comes down to offensive line play. I like what you said about how other teams are approaching Michigan as opposed to how they're approaching Ohio State. I think that's a really interesting point. I do think having Michigan getting Miles Hinton back would be huge.
Oh, yes.
I believe he is expected to play according to Sharon Moore. Of course, that's not true. He hasn't been listed as health. It's not 100% true. He hasn't been listed as healthy yet, so we don't know that. But if he plays, that'd be huge. There was no structural damage from that knee injury, which really looked bad at first. But so yeah, praise God for that.
Amen.
I also think J.J. McCarthy's legs on some sort of designed quarterback keepers could be huge this game. We haven't seen that a lot. The last game we saw it 0 against Penn State. We also didn't see a lot of jet sweeps. Like we talked about this off air as well. There was really only one jet sweep run, and it was a touchdown for Samaj Morgan, the freshman, who's really budded into a great player down the stretch. I think Michigan and Ohio State are going to get a lot more creative offensively. It's no secret that you hold back plays for these games, and you sometimes run a vanilla offense for most of the season and then break new stuff out. So I'm really interested to see if there's any sort of a J.J. McCarthy designed keeper that we haven't quite seen yet. Of course, we've seen him run the ball on designed keepers, but if we maybe see more of that, if on Ohio State's side we see some sort of trickeration, I don't know. It's going to be fun.
I'll tell you what Ohio State will do in this game, and I guarantee it. Because Michigan did this with McNamara against Ohio State, and also against Michigan State, and it was genius. No one expects McCord to run. I guarantee you they run a quarterback draw with him one or two times that catches Michigan's defense off guard. Because he has he plays power 5 quarterback, so he can pick up yards if there's wide open space. I'd look for that. For Michigan, I was thinking of something and it just slipped my mind. Quarterback sneak hasn't been called for Michigan at all this season.
Yeah.
And with Ohio State, again, they go wide defensively. Even on 3rd and 1, their defensive line's wide with big gaps, but they have safeties or corners or linebackers who fill in those gaps. And I don't know if I trust any of those linebackers or defensive backs to match up well, even with help, against Zach Zinner, Trevor Keegan, and Drake Nugent. If you're on a 3rd and 1, maybe you do just call a QB sneak with McCarthy, or maybe Wildcat QB sneak, or I think it would be a good creative way. It would be good to be creative on 3rd and short for Michigan, because they might be able to just pound the rock and Ohio State can't stop them, even with the improved defense. Because Ohio State's 21st in opponent yards per carry. They're outside the top 10 in rushing first downs per game, and they're 21st in rushing yards per game. I mean, this isn't... I thought differently early in the season. This isn't an elite run defense. And part of it might be by design, so I could be wrong. But I've watched them against Rutgers, or I've watched them against Maryland, or... not against Penn State, actually, but I've watched them when sometimes they try and stop the run and they can't in short yardage, or against Penn State, where when Penn State ran the ball and Ohio State didn't send more than 5 or 6 guys forward, Penn State picked up a first down or they got some decent yardage. So those are some areas to watch. I think for Michigan, they don't have to be as diverse or creative to move the football, but that could be a pretty big ask and assumption. You want to be creative. You want to bring everything out that you can in this game. I just think that they have a better matchup advantage running the football on OSU than OSU does on Michigan. And also, I think even with a quarterback edge, they'll have a harder time passing on Ohio State's secondary than OSU will on them, because Ohio State has the better secondary and the better wide receiver core. They have the better perimeter players defensively and offensively. Michigan just has the better trench play, they have the better play in between the tackle box outside of safety, running back, quarterback, tight end, O-line. Tight end and running back could be up for debate too. I liked what you said about the creativity, though. I need to see that from Michigan in this game, and I think they'll bring it out. But also for Ohio State, I wouldn't be shocked if they typically haven't done trickery against Michigan over the past 2 seasons. They really haven't. They have ran their base playbook, not vanilla, but they do what they do, or they against Michigan the previous 2 seasons. I haven't seen them come out with trickeration. One last thing before we make a prediction on this game, and then we'll check the chat after I mention this. Do you think Ohio State what do you gather the mood between these 2 teams and fan bases entering this game? Because for Ohio State, the mood that I gather is they're bringing intensity, but almost in like a business-like fashion. Like we're going to get this done. For Michigan, I haven't heard anything from Michigan about this game, outside of Blake Corum and the team just saying they have great players, done. What do you think the feeling is? Because I see more confidence radiated from Ohio State. And that could be good, but that also could be bad as well. What do you think?
I mean, frankly, I think Ohio State's really confident going into this game. I don't think they're necessarily confident that they're going to walk in Ann Arbor and just slaughter Michigan and blow Michigan off the ball, and because I don't think that's what's going to happen. And these Ohio State players aren't stupid. They understand that they're in for a battle, and so do the Michigan guys. But I think Ohio State's really confident. I think they've grown a lot since last year. I think they've grown a lot since early in the season. Early in the year, I thought I was looking at a team that Michigan was going to be favored by a good 6.5. And I think at one point, Michigan was favored by as much
They
as
were.
6. So I think Ohio State's grown a lot and gotten better throughout the year. I think they're confident for good reason. On the side of Michigan, I think you've also got a confident bunch, and it's for a different reason. It's because these guys have beaten Ohio State 2 years in a row. The last time they lost to Ohio State was 2019, so there's hardly anybody on the team who's lost to them. I think you've got a little bit of a wrench thrown into the spokes of Michigan because Jim Harbaugh isn't on the sidelines, and all this scandal and all the dust that's been kicked up around that has been a little bit of a distraction. Of course, all the players will tell you that they're focused solely on the game, but it's almost impossible not to let that get in your head a little bit. So there's definitely some of those leaders like Blake Corum are going to have to step up. Some of those upperclassmen are going to have to step up and keep the focus. I do think Michigan's confident. You're playing at home. You're playing as favorites. And I think almost being underdogs is good for Ohio State here. Talking about Michigan being favorites, I think they've got nothing to lose. And I'm curious to see if that affects – you talked about the play calling and how Ryan Day has kind of called a vanilla game in ways the last couple of years against Michigan. Something else to note about the last couple of years against Michigan is Ohio State has been favored by a total of, I think, 15.5 points. I believe last year was 9 and 2021 was 6.5.
Yep.
So you call a vanilla game figuring we can win playing vanilla football. Obviously, that didn't work out that way. This year, now you're underdogs going in Ann Arbor. Now, given it's 3.5 points, and a lot of people are picking Ohio State, but you're underdogs going in Ann Arbor. I wonder if that affects the play calling for Ohio State.
Ohio State performs majestically as an underdog. Now, under Day, they've only been an underdog, against Bama in 2020, against Georgia in 20. They've only been like an underdog, three times or 4 times, including this game. And he doesn't have that's too small of a sample size to say whether he's like get up and blow him out in underdog games, or if he isn't good, or if he's just neutral. There were more games in which Urban was an underdog in, I think, the same time frame compared to today in his 5 seasons. And I'd argue that's because Day has frankly had better and more talented teams, and he's also played in this year and last year in less competitive Big Ten conferences. Where this year and last year, it really is Michigan and OSU are on their own tier. Penn State's close, but yet oh so far, and everyone else sucks in comparison to those 3. I think Ohio State's confident, and I think they're wearing it a little more on their sleeve because I think they're emotional in the sense that I think they feel pressure, and I think they also want revenge, and they feel a little betrayed by the cheating. Michigan, I think they're confident, but they're silent. And there's negatives and positives to both. I'm excited to see this matchup. I'm ready to make a prediction here, and I made it a while ago, but I'm going to say Michigan 31, Ohio State 17. And I think this is pretty bold.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
This weekend, save big at PetSmart. Get 50% off on holiday toys.
Yeah, I hear you.
That was ESPN being stupid, even though I muted them. I think Michigan rushes for over 200 yards again.
Wow.
And I think that's because Ohio State is going to go wide. I think Michigan is going to use quarterback runs. Here's the biggest part, though. It won't necessarily be all on Ohio State's defense. I think Michigan's going to force more punts, and they're going to own clock more than they have the past 2 years because Ohio State's offense is that more inconsistent. So the defense will be better, but there will be even more pressure on them to perform because you don't have last year's offense or 2021's offense where you typically score over 40 points per game. Granted, Michigan had their plays, and we have to accept that that was part of their performance. But I don't know if they needed them to beat Ohio State. In fact, I'm going to argue that they didn't. And they held them to 27 and 23 points. They held them to an average of 25 points per game, those elite offenses over the past 2 seasons. And part of it was schematics, not just, oh, we're going to adjust because of your signs. Part of it was schematics and the fact they played soft zone every game, made Ohio State get a ton of plays offensively, chew clock, we're going to push your identity around. And Ohio State physically and emotionally melted down at the start of the third quarter in 2021. And in 2022, they emotionally melted down in the third quarter.
We don't have standing desks.
Again, ESPN.
We have standing days.
I don't understand it.
And when you're on your feet this
if it makes you feel better, I don't hear it. So.
Oh, I need to pause it. That's what's up because it refreshed. Yeah. Where was I? Okay.
Ohio State 2021 emotional meltdown.
Yup. In 2022, they emotionally melted down at about the same time, but they only physically broke on that long Donovan Edwards run. Yeah. And part of me would argue they never physically broke. They just made mistakes.
Yeah.
Not the total, we're getting owned here. Also, Egg Bowl, Mississippi 3, Mississippi State 0, and it's in the second quarter. So, chance for some chaos there. But I think that Ohio State's offense is going to be punting a lot. And they'll get some drives where they score, but Michigan will just be able to lean and eventually break through. And I think Michigan, I think they're going to be consistent, and they're going to come out. JJ will play a better game than he did against Maryland. And I think they'll be able to consistently move the ball on Ohio State's defense. And the reason I believe that is because Ohio State's defense lets you consistently move the football on them in between the 20s. The difference will be in the red zone. That's when Ohio State bows up. And I just don't think that defense can bow up forever in the red zone unless the offense can constantly move Michigan's defense. And I don't trust them to, and so far the statistics back me up there. Michigan's defense is better than Ohio State's defense statistically, and Michigan's offense is better statistically. And they have home field advantage. And if this game, Sharon Moore versus Ryan Day is only going to be a massive factor if the game is totally even and you have to make big, huge decisions. And I don't think Michigan will have to do that a ton. And if they do, they'll be able to fall back because I think they're better than Ohio State. I think they're at home. Now, the game will be close for 3-4 quarters, but I think Michigan will be in control noticeably by the time the fourth quarter begins, and I think that's when they start to really dig in and pull away. But that's just my opinion. Nathaniel Lathey says Buckeyes learned from the Rutgers game. Some others... Ohio State's only better at wide receiver. That's it. I disagree with that. I think they're better at secondary. You can't say they're only better at wide receiver when their defensive backs are relied upon more to prevent big plays than Michigan's DBs are, and they're better at stopping big pass plays than Michigan is. OSU can't stop Michigan in the red zone. Can't wait for Saturday. We'll have to see about that. I think this Ohio State defense can force field goals. The question is, will they? And Michigan in the red zone this season is a machine. They're not the most efficient because they're not top. I don't think they're top 25 in red zone efficiency. But when you only talk about scoring touchdowns, they're a machine. They don't kick field goals in the red zone anymore. They're very good and intentional at punching it into the red zone. Trying to look for any other comments. There are a lot of people in this chat, so I just want to read some comments here. What's your prediction while I'm reading the chat?
Yeah, I've got Michigan coming out on top 28-24. I think it's going to be a lot closer than you do. I think there's going to be a lot of punts. I agree with you there. I think there's going to be a lot of punts on both sides, and I think this game comes down to the offensive lines. I think Michigan is going to be able to run the ball. 200 yards is a lot, so we'll see if they get that number. And I also think Michigan's going to get pressure on Kyle McCord. And I already told you what I think. If Michigan gets pressure on Kyle McCord, I think Ohio State's in trouble.
Yep.
I do think the pure talent and God-blessed ability of Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to get Ohio State some big plays, and will keep him in the game. Emeka Ibuka, Cade Stover, Obviously, they have a home run threat in the backfield as well, Trayvon Henderson. So I think Ohio State could break a big play or two.
Yes.
But I think when it comes down to it, Michigan is going to move the ball more consistently, like you said, and sort of lean on that Ohio State defense. And by the time you get to the third quarter of facing bludgeoning runs up the middle, it just gets tough and it gets physically difficult to stay locked in that game.
Yeah.
And I think eventually something's going to break on that Ohio State defense, and Michigan will march the ball down the field enough. And, maybe it comes down to a big fourth down play. I mean, we talk so much about positions and schemes and all that stuff, and sometimes it comes down to, can Marvin Harrison Jr. beat Will Johnson one-on-one on 4th and 5? It might come down to that. It literally might come down to, can Michael Barrett guard Cade Stover one-on-one on a huge 4th and 3? I mean, that might decide the game.
Yeah. And if that's the case, if this game's 50-50 and it will come down to like a 4th down, I would lean Ohio State. I'm not. If you told me comes down to fourth and goal, and that play decides it, I would trust Ohio State because they have the head coach advantage. But here's what's interesting. People talk about offensive tackle for Michigan, and GOJ says the last year angle. I love it. Well, here's the thing. Penn State has double the amount of sacks that Ohio State does defensively. Penn State has 42 sacks.
Wow.
Ohio State's 21. Chop Robinson is he's certified a quicker defensive end and a more consistent defensive end than Tuimoloau or Sawyer.
Yes.
Penn State's rushing defense, they're not as physical as OSU or Michigan at tackle, but Penn State stacks the box basically like Ohio State does almost every play, except they stack it even more, and they're fast. They're really, I mean, they are built to shut down speed, and they're built to be quick. That's why Ohio State had such a hard time against them until, they were winning the field position battle, and yeah. I mean, like it's just, to me, it's not a last year angle. It's the fact that Michigan's weakness on offense is pass protection. Penn State is the best team in America to exploit a weakness at pass protection. Ohio State's not even top 75 in sack percentage, and that's not total sacks, because total sacks, that's I think a weaker statistic than sack percentage. Ohio State doesn't get the same pressure, they're not as fast, and they line up in a wider technique, which is good for stopping stretch. That's not as good at stopping interior runs. I think even with a better on average and more physical defensive front than Penn State, that Ohio State has, I think this season Michigan matches up better running against this Ohio State defense than they do Penn State's. And I think Penn State, pass defense-wise, factoring in pass rush, is probably matches up better with Michigan than OSU does. With straight-up secondary, I'd take OSU's over PSU's. But it's not a last year. I'm using the previous 2 seasons because, for example, the past 21 editions of the game, who has won? The team with more rushing yards. Streaks can be broken, but history also has this thing where it repeats itself.
Yes.
And even though I've seen Ohio State become more physical, and I've seen them tackle better and shut down runs and make stops on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, or I've seen them be phenomenal at stopping big plays, I see regression offensively. I see a pass rush that as of this season is actually worse than Ohio State's last season. I don't know exactly why that is, but it's worse. I think because partially they blitzed more last season, but at the same time, I don't know. I wonder why that is. I think that's mainly because of the blitzing. But the pass rush isn't elite. The rush defense, I question whether that's elite, but again, bend but don't break. I understand the argument for that, and I'm closer to saying they have an elite rush defense than not. I think that Michigan offensively matches up better with Ohio State than they did Penn State. The question is, how well does Ohio State's offense match up with Michigan's defense, because we know they have a better offense than Penn State. Way better. But I think Penn State, matchup-wise at least, has the better defense when facing Michigan than Ohio State, because the way they stack the box and how the way they stack the box and how they line up, I just think that Michigan was able to beat them on the outside. I don't think they'll be able to beat Ohio State on the outside, but interior-wise, especially if Mike Hall isn't 100%, I could see that happening. Any final thoughts before we move on to Week 12? Or not Week 12, but Week 13 previews for games?
Not really. I really like your comparison to Penn State, how they line up to how wide Ohio State lines up. Will be interesting to see if there is any sort of a shift in that also for Ohio State defensively, if they bring out, kind of pull a cat out of the hat this game and maybe wheel something different out there.
Okay. Music for me 007, good to see you on here. He said, it's not who's had more rushing yards, Sam. It's who ran for the highest yards per carry. Get it right. I think it's also who had the most rushing yards as well. I think it's both. Now that you mentioned that.
I think it is. Because I definitely have seen stuff about rushing yards.
Yeah.
Just total rushing yards leaders winning this game for
I have as well.
Back the wrong ways.
And it's interesting too, because there have been some games like 2018 and 2022 where it was really toward the end of the game where the winner began to rack up rushing yards, and it was because of big plays and passing that they were winning.
Yeah.
So there's a bit there. That streak could totally be proven irrelevant this Saturday. I mean, I could see a scenario where Michigan, because they run the football that more often than Ohio State, they end with a higher yards per carry, they end with more rushing yards, but maybe because of that bend but don't break defense and Ohio State gets some big plays through the air, Michigan runs the ball more effectively, but Ohio State comes out on top. I think that's unlikely. I think whoever is the better trench play, which I think is Michigan, wins this game, but it's possible. Let's talk about Week 13. Going over here to ESPN. So here we are, looking at everything. Gosh, so good. It's the final week of college football. I'm going to miss it. What do you think of Nebraska, Iowa? We'll do the Big Ten and then some top 25 matchups, and then we'll get out of here. What do you think of Iowa?
First of all, I'm not sure why Nebraska is favored. Nebraska is a 5-6 team. They're a middling team. They're not horrible. They're certainly not great. I mean, frankly, I don't get why a team that has scored 17, 10, and 17 points their last 3 games is favored against Iowa. I understand Iowa's offense doesn't do anything at all, but Nebraska might be lucky to get double digits. I think Iowa's – and listen, people like to clown on Iowa and act like Iowa's some bad joke of a football team. They're going to the Big Ten championship. Now, given it's in the Big Ten West, but you know what? This team is 8-2. Excuse me, 9-2. Iowa's 9-2. They got a chance to go 10-2. They're not a bad football team. They're 6-2 in the Big Ten. I think Iowa's going to win the game. Give me 17-10 final score prediction.
Mine's 13-10 Iowa. I agree with literally everything that you said. Typically, when you see home favorite with a worse record, you'd pick them, but I think Nebraska might be mentally broken, and they've lost 3 straight November games. Iowa just finds ways to win, and I've picked against them too much. No longer. Hawkeyes 13-10. What do you think about Penn State, Michigan State?
I think Penn State wins. I mean, that's not a hot take. They play at Ford Field tomorrow night, so that's a little interesting.
I'll be there.
You said what?
I'll be there.
Oh, okay. All right, so you'll get a front row view.
Yes.
I'll be watching at home, or actually, I might be watching some replays of some former Michigan Ohio State games at that point. But anyways, I digress. So I think it's another Michigan team losing in Ford Field on the second straight day tomorrow. I think Penn State's defense gives MSU's offense no shot. Penn State by 22 is a lot. Penn State does have a knack for blowing out bad teams and making themselves look better than they really are. I mean, they beat Maryland 51-15 the week before Michigan, and everyone was like, "Oh wow, their offense is getting going," and then back down to earth against the Wolverines.
Yes.
Last week against Rutgers, they won 27-6. They beat Massachusetts 63-0. They destroyed Northwestern 41-13. That game was a lot closer than that score looks. They beat Iowa 31-0. I don't think they're actually 31 points better than Iowa. So although this line is a lot, I can actually see them potentially covering. I think it'll be close because they do have a knack for kind of running up the score against lesser competition.
Yeah. I agree with Penn State winning, obviously. I'm taking Michigan State to cover, though. Aller, I don't know if he's healthy or not. He was injured against Rutgers. And Michigan State's won some games. They're injured, but I think they're going to play inspired. I'd expect Michigan State to announce the hiring of either Mike Elko or Jonathan Smith probably after this weekend, by the way. I think, Penn State wins. Michigan State, I think, covers just because Penn State isn't explosive offensively. They're slow offensively, too. And Michigan State's defense, you saw this against Ohio State, for example. They were actually able to get penetration, especially on the interior against Ohio State's O-line. But Ohio State was so fast and Michigan State was so slow, it didn't matter. Penn State's not that quick. They're not Ohio State athleticism or speed. They're built like a slow physical ACC team. So I think Penn State's going to win by double digits. I don't think they're going to win by more than 3 touchdowns or 17 points, though.
I want to say really quick, big shout out to Harlan Barnett. He's done a great job, I think, stepping in as the head coach at MSU. He took over a dumpster fire, just a tough situation. I feel bad for those student athletes. It's not a fun situation. They had to their whole season got thrown in the dumpster partway through. Everybody gave up on them, and they lost 6 straight games. And then, hey, they won a tough one against Nebraska, 20-17. Obviously, lost to Ohio State. That's as expected in Columbus. But then they gritted out another big win against Indiana in a trophy game. So, hey, I want to congratulations to MSU, and I mean that legitimately. Harlan Barnett's done a really good job winning a couple of games down the stretch.
Oh, yeah. He certainly gained more of my respect throughout the season, whereas early in the season they blew some games, and that was like, wow, like seriously? You led at Iowa, you led at Rutgers, but whatever. At this point, you just got to focus on what you have in front of you. MSU's not going bowling because they're not even close to leading an APR, so the minute this game is done, on to 2024 preseason. Their 2024 preseason starts Saturday. Essentially. One thing before we move on to some of these other Big Ten games, that Maryland game where Penn State came out on top, that's sort of my angle with the Michigan-Ohio State game in 2 days, is Michigan performed in an off game like how Penn State had an off game but in a good way against Maryland, and I think reality comes back on Saturday in the game. That's just my opinion, though. Whenever I see the vast majority of the public betting one team in this big top 10 matchup, and the teams on the road, and the home team's favored and the line isn't moving, to me that screams that I think Vegas favors one team in particular, and I think we know who that is.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I will say so in my live reaction, because I will be going live for that game. Okay, Indiana versus Purdue. Really the battle of 3 and 8 teams, so it doesn't really matter that much. I'm going with Purdue here.
Yeah, I think Purdue wins. I think Purdue's just good enough to squeak out one against Indiana. Like you said, Indiana's coming off a loss to Michigan State last week. Frankly, neither of these are very good football teams. We learned that early in the year with Purdue when they got blown out by Syracuse, who also sucks, by the way. And Indiana was never supposed to be good. I think Purdue wins.
Yeah. Northwestern, who gained bowl eligibility last week, versus a 5-6 Illinois team who is fighting for bowl eligibility?
I think Northwestern wins this game. And what a story. I mean, Northwestern, coming into the year, you've got your head coach, your best head coach in your program's history, and it's not close, is out the door because of hazing and all this stuff. And what do you know? You're expected to win 2 games, 1 game. I picked Northwestern to win 2 games this year when I did some preseason predictions. And now, how many of their last 4 games have they won? Have they won 3 of 4?
I think so.
What a performance. What a job by David Braun, head coach for this Northwestern
Yeah, he was
squad.
just named the head coach last week.
Of rallying, and he deserves it. This guy 100% without a shadow of a doubt should be Big Ten Coach of the Year.
He should be.
There's not a question.
Let me think who the playoff contenders are. Has anyone Jeff Brom should be National Coach of the Year. That's really the only team right now that's in the conversation for playoffs or New Year's Six bowl eligibility who was viewed as pretty out of the picture in the preseason.
Yeah.
But I think Braun, he should be Big Ten Coach of the Year, no question. Yeah. No question.
Yeah, so Northwestern's a really fun story. They were in the complete dumpster fire preseason, and the way they've rallied, and frankly, their season started how everyone thought it would. But like we said, they've kind of caught fire later in the year and have won some tough games. I think Northwestern's gonna end the regular season 7-5, and I'm here for it.
It's a fun story, and I'm glad that they have next to no talent by high school rankings, and they're finding ways to win. There's something about North Dakota State coaches where they're just geniuses. Look at Chris Kleiman at Kansas State, Craig Bohl at Wyoming. Like they win developmentally, and I hope David Braun finds a way to make Northwestern into this really good developmental program. I think Illinois is going to win, though, because they have been pulling it together. They were horrid in the beginning of the season. I think at one point they were 2-5 or 2-4. They're now 5-6. I think they're going to get bowl eligibility. But still, a successful season for Northwestern. 4 Big Ten wins, 6 wins overall. You're going bowling. You'll probably win your bowl game, I got to be honest, but maybe not. Wisconsin at Minnesota.
Wisconsin, I think Minnesota wins this game. Wisconsin at Minnesota, I'm gonna go with the Gophers. Wisconsin, man, really underwhelming. Coming into the Luke Fickell's first year. Now, obviously, it's his first year, and you give him some time naturally to try to develop, but they just have not looked great. I mean, speaking of Northwestern, that was really when you kind of started to realize, whoa, Northwestern's got something going on when they beat Wisconsin by 14 in Madison. And that's also when Wisconsin fans start banging their heads against the wall and going, what are we doing losing to Northwestern by 14-0? So Wisconsin has lost 3 of their last 4 of their last 6. That includes losses to Iowa, 15-6. That's an ugly loss. You lose close-ish to Ohio State. That was a good game. You lose to Indiana and Northwestern back-to-back. Really? Yeah. That's tough. And then you squeak out one in overtime against Nebraska, who's fallen apart, frankly, at this point. So, yeah, I'm not impressed with Wisconsin at all. Minnesota fighting for bowl eligibility at home in a rivalry game. I like them winning this one. Minnesota's coming off 3 straight losses as well, so they're not exactly on fire, but I do think the Golden Gophers pull this one out.
Yeah. This is tough for me to pick. I'm going to go opposite of you once again and pick Wisconsin because Minnesota has allowed, a combined 86 points in the past 2 games to Purdue and Ohio State. They've scored 33 in that same stretch. I think they're done. There's something about this team that is broken, and I don't know what it is, but they're busted. They're 5-6. They're like Nebraska. They both were 5-3 at one point and leaders in their division, and they just fell apart. And I think Wisconsin, with Tanner Mordecai healthy and Braylon Allen getting healthier against that defense, this could be a signature win for Fickell saying, hey, we disappointed and we know that, but we're gaining some momentum heading into a 2024 season where They open up against Alabama at home next year, which, I mean, Alabama's winning that, but if you can keep it close, it's respectable. And then finally, Maryland at Rutgers. Maryland, a 2-point favorite on the road.
I'm going with the Scarlet Knights. I really think Rutgers wins this game. I'm a huge fan of Rutgers football, man. How fun is it to have Rutgers have a good football and, frankly, basketball program as of late? I also think you just look where Maryland's trending. They started out 5-0 and then really threatened to go 6-0. They competed with Ohio State. They were up in the third quarter of that game, 17-10, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
They were.
And then they lose that game, which is okay. So you lose to Ohio State. That's a top 5 team. Then you lose to Illinois. Then you lose to Northwestern. Then you get slaughtered by Penn State. Then you squeak out a 13-10 win against Nebraska. You play actually really well against Michigan, but you drop that game too. So now they're in a spot where they've lost 5 out of their last 6. They're 6-5. They're heading to Piscataway at 3:30. So about half of that game will be a night game. And Rutgers, they're a solid football team. Rutgers is currently sitting at 6-5 as well. They've lost 3 straight. So a lot of these teams we're talking about are kind of going downhill. But if you look at Rutgers' 3 straight losses, it's to Ohio State, Iowa, and Penn State. So those are respectable losses in my book. I think they beat Maryland to get win number 7.
You know what? I'm going to go with you also based off of the angle that Maryland left it all on the field against Michigan. And they played a hard 4 quarters. It wasn't good enough. And Rutgers is a team that I think is like Iowa. Their goal is to win the game they have to play that specific week. I think they have a better culture than Maryland. So Gavin Wimsatt and Kyle Monungai, those are awesome players. How about they rush and they beat Maryland to go to 7-5 and potentially an 8-5 Rutgers with a bowl win. And next season, they don't play Michigan or Ohio State. They have an easy schedule. That could be a team that gets ranked at some point next year, or a team that can compete for 9 or 10 games, like 10 wins. It's crazy.
I don't think they ever have been ranked. Actually,
I don't think so.
In the college football playoff era.
I think they nearly were. Not in the college football playoff, but in the polls, I think after that Ohio State game, if they beat Iowa on the road, they would have been ranked. That was their closest, and unfortunately, didn't happen, but it is what it is. Let's check the chat, and then is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I mean, not in particular. We can go over a couple of the big games if you want to talk about Oregon State prediction really quick. Go over maybe the Iron Bowl. I know you teased that earlier. So maybe give some quick predictions for some of those games if you'd like to.
Yes, let's do that. Before that, I will quickly check the chat. Just a lot of people arguing about Michigan, Ohio State. This is the beauty of the game, just the intense animosity between the two fan bases. And it will get worse. It will get worse after this year. And it's not just because the whole sign stealing stuff. It's also because these two teams are going to be facing twice and potentially 3 times in the 12-team playoff. And, oh my gosh, Mississippi State, Ole Miss might be tied entering half. That's scary at 3-3. Gosh, what was I going to say? The loser of this game is going to they're going to swallow a bitter pill. Now, I think that I think both pills are bitter, but I think if you're Ohio State, you'll lose. If you lose this game, you'll probably beat Michigan, perhaps crush them next year because you return more, you recruit better, you're at home, and Michigan might have a new head coach depending on what happens. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's just the loser here really is going to come away with a black eye like they are. And that's why I'm scared, because I'm confident Michigan wins, but if we lose, very, very, very painful. Let's look at some big games. Oregon State.
Yeah, give me Oregon. Give me Bo Nix. Bo Nix is having fun. If anybody gets that TND takeover reference, he is having fun. It's hard to not have fun when you're 10-1 and you're swinging the ball around like he is. He's in the Heisman conversation. I think the Heisman Trophy comes down to the Pac-12 championship between him and Michael Penix. Whoever outperforms the other one and probably wins that football game, I think wins the Heisman. So he's right there. He's a really talented player. Bucky Irving is a beauty to watch at running back. He's running. I'm not sure if this is still accurate, but he was running for about 7-ish a carry. Let me check the team's stats. Yeah, he's running for 6.7 a carry.
Yes.
Jordan James, their running back 2, is running for 7.2 a carry. So they run for 6 yards a carry as a squad. I mean, wow. Just wow. I mean, Bo Nix can run the ball himself. Let's give him some credit. He's running for 5.1 a carry, and that's counting sacks. So how impressive is that? They've actually got a decent defense over there, even a good defense. I've got this team winning the Pac-12. I think they're going to beat Washington. I cannot wait for that rematch. It's going to be so fun. I think they win in a high-scoring game at home against Oregon State. I think they just boat race them and outscore them. Give me 45-34.
I think Oregon wins. I think Oregon covers. I'm a little too tired and hungry to give a score prediction, but Bo Nix is really good. Damian Martinez, though, for Oregon State, he's averaging about 6-7 yards per carry at running back. And Uiagalelei's been up and down, but he's still pretty good. And then Silas Bolden at wide receiver, Velling at tight end. Both of these teams have elite offenses, but Oregon has a great defense. Oregon State's defense has been questionable this season, unlike the past 2 defenses in 21 and 22. Plus, I think Jonathan Smith has other coaching jobs on his mind. Meanwhile, Dan Lanning is totally focused on getting to the playoffs and winning a national title, or at least a Pac-12 championship. Yeah. I do think, though, Jaden Daniels, he should earn the Heisman. He's the best player in America. Jaden Daniels is.
Yeah, he's got, ESPN lasting ads in the background. Okay, there we go. Yeah, you're right. Jaden Daniels could sneak in and win the Heisman. That's true. I forgot about him. He's in there as well. Will be interesting to see if the Heisman voters care about those losses Daniels has. Now, given they aren't his fault, but he does have a couple more losses than Penix or Nix have.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we're gonna do the Iron Bowl. Alabama at Auburn. Auburn coming off of a blowout loss to New Mexico State. What's your pick?
What are we doing? What are we doing? Losing to New Mexico State. Was it 31-13? Was that the final score?
31-10.
31-10. Okay, I gave them too much credit. That's horrible. So honestly, when we had talked about this off air, I forgot about that New Mexico State loss. I was going to say this game can go one of two ways. Either Alabama runs away with it because they're on fire right now and are looking really good. And I'm excited for that that matchup with Georgia rather in the SEC championship game. I was going to say either Alabama blows them out of the water or Alabama, who hasn't really beaten a great team yet this year. I mean, they beat LSU. You can argue whether LSU is great. I don't think they are. I think they're good, not great. Whether Alabama comes into Jordan Hare and has some trouble, and that game is going to be sort of half a night game because of how late in the year we are now. It gets dark at about 4:30. This is a 3:30 kick Eastern time. Maybe Auburn and Peyton Thorne go out there and fight, but man, a loss to New Mexico State feels like they're already looking ahead to the Bama game. I think Bama crushes them. I'd love for this game to be close. I think it's fun if this game is close. But again, Alabama winning makes the college football playoff picture so much more interesting with them still being in the picture.
I don't want them to be in the picture because I think the SEC is overrated and I want to be right, but Alabama is going to be in the picture because they're going to crush Auburn. They're going to win. Going to cover the 13-point spread. There's a chance I could see, and I wouldn't be surprised if Auburn plays Alabama close because I still don't like this Alabama team, but they're clearly better than they were just a few weeks ago. So they're going to win. They're going to dominate. Okay. You just see the remaining games. Okay. Florida State at Florida. Florida State is a 6.5-point road favorite. Florida will be without Graham Mertz in the same way that Florida State is without Jordan Travis, by the way. So both teams without their starting quarterback. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I actually wasn't aware Mertz is out for this game. So thanks for that. Give me Florida State. I think Florida State squeaks it out. I do want to note that losing Jordan Travis is a lot worse than losing Graham Mertz. Even though Graham Mertz has actually been solid this year, he's actually been pretty good. Losing Jordan Travis is a huge blow. Florida State, I think they understand that if they lose this game, their season's over. I think even if they win the next week and win the ACC, I don't think the committee will respect that enough because of the weakness of their schedule and how, frankly, trash the entire ACC is outside of Florida State. So I think they have to win this week, and I think they do squeak it out.
I think they do too. I say that with a sigh because I want more chaos outside of the Big Ten,
Yep.
but I think they do. If Graham Mertz was healthy, I'd probably pick Florida, but whoever's backing up Graham Mertz, I think Jack Miller, maybe. He's not. There's going to be a drop-off from Mertz to that backup in the same way that there's a drop-off from Jordan Travis to Tate Rodemaker. So Florida State wins. I think Florida State covers by more than 6.5, and that's it. Thank you for coming on. Anything else that you want to say? And we'll check the chat one more time.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. It's fun. It's a fun time of year. Egg Bowl is 3-0, by the way. Mississippi State found a way not to score going into half. So we got a 3-0 slugfest going on. So I'm going to go enjoy the second half of that one and eat some desserts. But yeah, man, the game on Saturday, I'm gonna get nervous. I'm gonna be really nervous around kickoff. I know you're gonna be doing a live stream of it, so you'll have to try to control your nerves a little bit.
Oh, I will.
But yeah, I'm gonna be at game day. I know you said you'd consider going. So yeah, if you're in Michigan, come to game day. It's gonna be a great environment. I went to the 2021 game day in Ann Arbor. That's the only time I've been to an Ann Arbor game day, and it did not disappoint. It's going to be a crazy environment. It's going to be about 18 degrees, so going to have to bundle up, wear a couple layers. But yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be a fun day, and it'll be a lot more fun if Michigan wins.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm going to check the chat one more time. Go Blue, says John Stoops. Go Blue. Beetle is calling someone a clown. Moose 11-0 says we want Georgia. Oh, I want Georgia too. I want everyone. I think if we beat Ohio State in the way I'm predicting us to, I think we'll be very confident in our chances against Georgia. Let's just put it that way. Because Georgia has a worse rush defense than Ohio State does. The difference is, again, because of past history, teams respect Georgia's defensive line more than any other D-line. So they don't run on Georgia. But I guarantee you run on Georgia. If you play a run-heavy game against Georgia, you could control that game. Even though they're an elite team. But their weakness is their run defense.
Yep.
So, yeah, go Blue. For Ohio State fans, may the best team win. I'm hoping that both of us can get into the playoffs this season to fulfill my preseason prediction, but it is unlikely. Okay. Thank you for coming on, and have a great day, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for all the support, and like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye-bye.
All right.
All righty.